Okay, we are on to video number 4 of the United States government and how it's supposed to work. These are still relatively historical discussions. We will. It won't be part of the series to talk about current events in depth. This is just a reference series for that. And when you go back and talk about, what did the Constitution mean? What how do you interpret whatever the Constitution has to say? And you just wish that, like, man, why couldn't the guys who wrote this just explain it a little better? Could we just like get a hold of them and have them tell us what they were really meaning when they wrote that? And as luck would have it, they did. You see, before the Constitution was written, we had a previous draft of how our states were going to get along, referred to as the Articles of Confederation. Now, we had just broken away and won our independence, and nobody was really interested in creating another big government to replace the one we just got rid of. They were just worried that big governments always became corrupt and would just be, another problem for the future. So the colonies, they really just wanted to be on their own. They were printing their own money, kind of doing their own thing, and the Articles of Confederation were just kind of a United Nations type thing, where we were all just supposed to kind of get together and work together when we needed to, but for the most part, everybody was on their own. Anyway, that wasn't working out. That went on for about 10 years, 10 or 12 years before they finally decided that they needed to fix that. And they got together the Continental Congress, some 55 people, I think, who they sent to straighten the bugs out of the Articles of Confederation. Now, they were expecting, when they sent them in there, that it was just going to be some amendments and some improvements to what was already there. When the Continental Congress sat down and started working on it, they decided that the Articles of Confederation were just inadequate to the task, and they drew up the Constitution from scratch. And unlike today, where the Constitution has been around for a while and everybody knows, what it is and how it works, in terms of, it's a great way to run a country and et cetera. Back then, nobody knew. It was an experiment. They were taking what they could see from other countries that had failed. You're looking at, democracy and republics. You got the Greeks and the Romans. Those were great societies until they weren't. So you kind of had to look at, you were just the next rocket being fired at the moon, and everybody went down in flames last time. So you're just hoping you get the bugs out of it this time. But they come up with this federal government idea of one government over top of all of the states. And they had to convince the states of this. I mean, they couldn't just throw out the Articles of Confederation. It had to be voted on. And according to the Articles of Confederation, changes like that required a 2/3 vote, which would be 9 of the 13 states had to approve it. So, this is where we get lucky, because all of or many members of the Constitutional Congress wrote letters to the states explaining what the Constitution was, specifically talking about what dangers were, ahead of us in terms of why we needed the government, what it needed to protect us from, how were they planning on avoiding, corruption and insurrection and all these other problems. They just spell it out, and there's tons of these letters, and they're all You can read them all online, the Library of Congress. They are called the Federalist Letters. And they like I said, they cover all kinds of things. The ones I want to talk about today, this numbers I think 9 and 10 were from Hamilton and Monroe, and they are addressing the problem of factions. Now we talked about liberty for all, liberty and justice for all in the last video, and how that's not always how people think. People would rather just say, like, I'm sure I'm right, and other people should do what I think because I'm sure I'm right. And that idea, as opposed to the liberty of everyone to make their own choices and everybody to live the way they want, and that liberty being evenly dispersed between them as best as they can. The idea that one person should be right and the other person should be oppressed. The other person shouldn't get a choice. He should just have to do what the other person says. And that kind of thinking leads to factions. And that's just when people start to talk like that, they get together. It's like other people agree, and now all of a sudden you got a handful of people over here, and they're all, yep, things should definitely go that way, and they're just opinionated. But the biggest delineator, the thing that they talk about in these Federalist Letters, is that factions are a threat to liberty, because the people pushing these ideals or these agendas for the faction don't care about the liberty of the people that disagree with them. They believe that their way is right, and they just need to enforce that on everyone else. Now, if that starts to sound familiar to you, that's because our political parties have become factions. And we've talked about this in previous videos, how the political parties are polarizing people and pitting the world against one another instead of trying to help everybody work together. Well, that wasn't me just pulling that out of the air. That's written up by the people who wrote the Constitution in the Federalist Papers. You can read those for yourself. They're about as hard to read as the Constitution is, but at least they clarify some things. So the problem with factions and the whole structure of the government was to protect us from factions, because you have two main threats as a government. You have the threat of invasion from the outside, with other countries coming and trying to take over, or you have insurrection from within, where one group of the people in the country wants to take over the country and dominate the other group. Okay. Sound familiar? So, back in the colonial days, back in the early days of the country, you couldn't, pick up the phone and call somebody on the other side of the country. Traveling and communicating and getting together with people took time. It was a lot of effort involved to move around. So they were thinking that one of the things that would help protect the country from factions was the size of the country. Being that big, it would be hard for a very large group of people to get together, or for a faction like that to spread to a size big enough to start taking over the government or start influencing the government in a negative way. So, but they go on. They continue. That was why the whole separation of powers, the checks and balances systems, where you have the Congress and the Senate and the President and the Supreme Court and the the division of power between the states and the federal government, which we're going through. With one of the things that you're dealing with now with the Roe versus Wade thing, because anything that's expressly defined in the Constitution is controlled by the federal government, and the states can't overrule it, which is what we had with the Roe versus Wade ruling. When the Roe versus Wade ruling got overturned, it was no longer expressly declared in the Constitution. So it falls back to the individual states being able to make the decisions, and the federal government loses its authority. And that, again, that was just one more way of breaking the government into smaller pieces. And the things, like the Senate and Congress and the president, all of those things, all of those people have their own function and their own job, but at the same time, they all require a certain amount of approval or connection from somewhere else in the government. Congress passes law, but the president can veto it. The president can veto it, but Congress can repass it with a 2/3 majority and overrule him. The president is the commander-in-chief, but Congress declares war. It's, everything is divided up like that so that nobody could come in and take over. Though they do discuss that, that any section of the government being taken over by a faction is a bad thing. But if you want to see what a faction really looks like, when a faction takes control, and I'm not picking on the Republicans right now. It just, as an example right now, because the Roe being overturned is a Republican issue. You've got states, okay, Democratic and Republican states, that are completely under the control of their faction. You've got Democratic states where all of the government, or the majority of government branches in every branch are one party. Okay, so you go to Ohio or whatever, it's a Republican state, and you've got a Republican governor, Republican senators, Republican. It's just Republicans across the board. And you remember our previous video on liberty, where liberty for all, justice for all, means that everybody is free to live their life the way they want, as much as possible, and as fairly, everybody gets as much liberty as possible, as fairly as possible, for that to happen. But you look at a state that has these trigger laws for Roe. Do they look like they are being fair to everyone in the state, or do they're just like zealously crazy with powers? Like, oh yes, we can finally make this decision, and the federal government can't stop us. And they're just crazy with that kind of power. And I don't care if you're for or against Roe. That's not the point I'm making. This is about how the government is supposed to work. And this is so you see the danger that a faction poses. Okay, either faction. Okay, Republicans, Democrats, ISIS, Nazis, they're all factions that just want to take over and tell everybody how to live. You just need to, and this is dangerous. If, I don't want this whole video to be about the Roe thing. It just fits the discussion at the moment. But, Roe gets overturned, and it has sweeping effects across the entire country. And then the Democrats are talking about, just get us a couple more seats in the Senate and we'll control enough of the government to pass a law and put Roe back in as federal law. But what you're doing is a faction is asking for enough control to make sweeping effects across the entire country again. Do you really trust a faction that much? Because here's the other thing, if somebody has an absolute majority in every branch of the government, they can change anything they want. So you vote somebody in. It's like, yeah, he's great. And if he acts up, then we'll vote him out. Well, guess what? If you give him too much power, he'll change the voting system. You don't get a chance to vote him out afterwards. Oh, surprise. The Romans, they were falling apart. They thought they needed an emperor. They put an emperor in charge, and he was supposed to give power back when he was done. Well, that didn't happen. All right. Nobody wants to give up power once they get it. So again, factions are dangerous. You need to understand the difference between a faction and representatives. Okay, if you had, representatives like lobbyists just going in and saying, it's like, hey, we have this issue, it needs to be part of the discussion, we don't need to be left out. That's different than saying we want everything our way and to heck with everybody else. And we're just going to, increase the number of votes we can do until we can force it on everybody who doesn't want it. Our government will not survive that. Our country will not survive that. Okay, that is the kind of thinking that leads to civil war, which is a big thing. You're talking, a lot of people talking about whether or not the U.S. is headed for a civil war. Well, you've got two options. We either do or we don't. And there have been a lot of other countries in recent history that have come up to this same point we're coming up to now. The ones who get sucked in by their charismatic leaders to believing that, they need to purge half of the country that's causing the problem. Hitler had to get rid of the Jews and, whoever's got to do what. It's easy to point a finger at somebody else, say they're the cause of the problem, and rally support around you. Okay? That's you look at either political party in the U.S. and they've got the people that they want to point fingers at and tell you they're the problem. And they're not just pointing fingers at politicians. They're pointing fingers at crowds of Americans. Those people are causing the problem. Those people are going to get us in a war. And civil war is not going to be a bunch of people with muskets going out to the fence line. That's not going to happen. We're going to have insurgency. We're going to have, small groups of people just acting out. It's just going to be like riots in a city, but it's just going to be the entire country. Unhappy people acting out. And the half of the government, the half of the fight that still has control of the U.S. military, well, they're going to have things like, air support and satellites and drones and tanks. And the other people aren't. So that's not going to go well. Now, if you want to avoid it, simple. Embrace democracy. Real democracy. Liberty for all. Justice for all. Everybody learns to live together. Everybody is free to do what they want. Stop trying to tell other people how to live. Learn to get along. Countries have done that. Countries have gone to the brink of civil war and decided, nope. They got rid of the leaders who were talking about polarizing their nation, and they pulled together, and they survived. So that's what this, this is the main topic in current events that made me start the channel right now. I've thought about this channel in the past with people talking about global warming and other things where they just didn't seem to think things through fully. But this is happening now. This is the world we're in. This is the world that my kids are going to inherit. And we need to do something, and we need to do it soon. And we don't need to do something like, take our torches and pitchforks up to the castle. That's not what we need to do. We don't need a bunch of people storming the Capitol. That's not how it works. We need to vote people into office who understand. We need to tell the people who are in office what we expect from them, and we need to hold them to it. Anyway, that's what I got. Federalist Papers. Go look at them. They're online. Again, it's all that early English stuff. It's hard to read, but you can get through it. Numbers 9 and 10, I'm pretty sure, were the ones I was reading on factions. But you just have to wake up, and you got to accept the fact you're not going to get everything you want. But sometimes it's easier to just not fight about it. If you're religious, pray for us all. If you're intellectual, go out and talk sense into people. But you can't just sit at home and let it all happen without you. Do something. Talk to somebody. Start your own video blog. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.